Late afternoon light was spilling across our street, that soft golden kind that usually makes me feel calm, even grounded. Ethan and I were unloading groceries, chatting about nothing important, just enjoying that easy rhythm couples fall into after years together. I remember shifting a bag on my hip when I heard the deep growl of a moving truck coming down the road. I turned, expecting another quiet family or maybe a retired couple. Instead, I watched the truck stop right next door, and my chest tightened without knowing why. Something in the air felt different, like a subtle warning tapping on my shoulder. A woman stepped out, tall, blonde, confident in that way women are when they know exactly the effect they have on a room, or on a man. Before I could even process it, Ethan leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that instantly made my stomach clench. "Court, that's Marissa." At first, I honestly thought he meant another Marissa, a neighbor, a coworker, anyone else. But when I asked, "Your ex?" he just nodded, looking pale. He swore he didn't know she was moving here, and maybe he didn't, but shock has a way of making your mind run ahead of the facts. I stood there, gripping a grocery bag, trying to understand why the universe was dropping his past onto my doorstep. Then she waved, flashing a smug smile that felt sharper than it looked, like she was already peeling back layers of my life she wasn't invited into. She sauntered over, her tone sweet but cutting, saying things like, "He told me a lot about you," as if she'd been waiting for this moment. I forced my best polite smile, years of conditioning, I guess, and welcomed her to the neighborhood. But when Ethan and I walked inside and I glanced back, she was staring at me with a slow, mocking smirk. A smirk that curled right into my gut and twisted. And deep down, I felt it. That whisper that tells you your calm life is about to crack open. Inside the house, I tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to me like static after a storm. I put the groceries away while Ethan hovered nearby, giving me those sidelong glances husbands give when they're waiting for an emotional explosion. But I wasn't angry yet. I was processing, turning over every detail, every tone, every look. That's something people underestimate about me. I don't break in the moment. I observe. I store things. I wait. Still, even with all that, I felt this dull throb in my stomach, like a quiet alarm no one else could hear. I kept replaying her smile, the way she said my name, stretching it just enough to make it feel like a challenge. When Ethan tried to distract me with a joke, I could tell he was nervous, but he didn't want to show it. He kept insisting he had no idea she was moving here, and I could hear the truth in his voice, but I could also hear the tension. Marissa wasn't just an ex. She was a ghost from a chapter he'd closed long before me. And now she was standing 20 feet from my kitchen window. The idea of her watching us, listening, inserting herself into a life she had no place in, it made my skin prickle. Later, when I stepped outside to take the trash out, I felt her presence before I even looked in her direction. Sure enough, there she was, leaning casually against a stack of moving boxes, pretending to text, but her eyes were locked right on me. The way she tilted her head, slow and deliberate, told me more than any introduction ever could. She wasn't here to start fresh. She was here to stir something. And for the first time that day, I felt a flicker of something sharp inside me. Not fear, not jealousy, but awareness. Like the first spark before a match ignites. When Ethan and I finally sat down that evening, the house felt quieter than usual, as if it too sensed the shift next door. I kept catching myself glancing out the window, half expecting to see her silhouette there, watching us. It's strange how quickly a stranger can disturb the peace you've spent years building. I tried to talk myself down, reminding myself that people move, neighborhoods change. But this wasn't just anyone. This was someone tied to a version of Ethan I'd never met, someone who seemed a little too pleased to be back in his orbit. And that unsettling twist in my gut only grew. I told myself I wouldn't make assumptions, but my mind kept drifting back to the way she smirked at me. It was the kind of expression women use when they're not just entering your life, they're announcing themselves in it. I could feel old insecurities tapping on my shoulder, the ones I thought I'd outgrown years ago. But along with them came something else, a sharper, steadier instinct. The part of me that protects what's mine, my peace, my home. I didn't say anything to Ethan yet. I wasn't ready to sound paranoid or dramatic. I needed to watch more, understand more, before deciding how to handle her. That night, As I stood at the living room window and saw her porch light flicker on, I felt a strange mix of calm and tension settle in my chest, almost like standing at the edge of a story I didn't ask to be part of, but one I suddenly couldn't ignore. I didn't know exactly what Marissa wanted, or why she chose this neighborhood, this street, this exact house. But something told me her arrival wasn't an accident. And as I turned away from the window, I felt the first ripple of a truth I wouldn't fully understand until later. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something. A few days later, I was in the garden, clipping back the lavender bushes that had started to spill over the walkway. Gardening has always been my quiet escape, the place where my thoughts settle into something softer. But that morning, the air felt heavier, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. I sensed someone approaching before I even lifted my head, and when I finally did, there she was, Marissa, standing at the fence with her arms crossed, wearing that same smug look she'd flashed at me on day one. Instantly, the peacefulness I'd been feeling evaporated. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with sweetness that didn't match the sharpness of her words. "Courtney, honey, you're brave for wearing shorts with thighs like that." For a second, I didn't even react. My brain froze, trying to decide if I'd heard her correctly. Then the heat crept up my neck, not from embarrassment, but from a sudden spike of anger I wasn't used to tasting so early in the day. I forced a smile, not because I wanted to, but because women like her feed on visible reactions. "Good thing I'm not trying to impress anyone," I said, my voice steady, even though inside, something simmered. She smirked, tilting her head like she was evaluating me, then casually added, "True. Ethan always liked different types." And she winked. A slow, deliberate wink meant to land like a knife. I stood there, speechless for a beat, gripping my gardening shears a little too tightly. I walked back toward the house before she could see the frustration trying to claw its way out of my chest. Inside, the air conditioning hit me with a cold burst, but it did nothing to cool the fire spreading through my thoughts. Something was shifting, and I could feel it in every part of me. That evening at dinner, I tried to play it cool, but it was impossible to swallow pasta and irritation at the same time. I kept replaying her words, the tone, the wink, the burn of it all echoing louder than the clink of silverware. Eventually, I set my fork down and looked at Ethan, really looked at him, searching for some sign that he understood the weight of what was happening. "Your ex is strange," I finally said. "She's pushing boundaries." He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose the way he does when he wants a problem to disappear just by willing it. He told me not to give her attention, said it was exactly what she wanted, like this was some petty playground game between two women who barely mattered to each other. But that wasn't it. This felt intentional, calculated, personal. I tried to explain the way she hovered, the way she stared, how her comments weren't casual jabs but precise little cuts. Ethan listened, but I could tell he didn't feel threatened because he wasn't the target. I was. And there's a particular loneliness that comes with feeling like you're fighting a battle your partner can't see. After dinner, I cleaned the kitchen in silence, letting the rhythm of washing dishes calm me down. I'm not proud of it, but I tried convincing myself I was overreacting, that maybe I was misreading her intentions, that maybe this was just a weird coincidence. But deep inside, a quiet voice insisted this wasn't paranoia, it was intuition, and it's never failed me before. Still, I decided to give it time. I needed to observe, to gather my bearings, to figure out exactly what kind of storm was brewing next door. The next week proved I wasn't imagining anything. I was in the kitchen one afternoon, rinsing vegetables for dinner, when something made me glance toward Marissa's house. At first, I thought I'd misunderstood what I was seeing. But no. There she was, walking around completely naked, curtains pulled wide open, moving slowly, deliberately, like she was posing for an invisible audience. And the worst part wasn't the nudity itself. It was the way she stared directly at my window, holding my gaze as if daring me to react. My heart hammered in disbelief that quickly turned into a pure, sharp fury. I slammed the faucet off so hard water splashed the counter. I shoved the window open and shouted, "What the hell is wrong with you?" My voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the shock of finally seeing her drop the pretense. She just laughed, an easy, taunting laugh, like I was the one performing for her entertainment. Then she tossed her hair back and said, "Oh, relax. Maybe Ethan misses the view." The words hit me like a slap. For a second, I just stood there, gripping the edge of the windowsill so tightly my fingers ached. That wasn't an insult. That was a declaration. Something inside me shifted right then. Not a breakdown, not panic. Something colder, steadier. It was the moment a woman stops defending her peace and starts preparing to reclaim it. I closed the window without another word, feeling a clarity I hadn't felt in days. This wasn't going away on its own. Marissa wasn't just being petty. She was escalating, and if she wanted to turn this into a psychological game, she had no idea who she was playing with. Because in that moment, deep in my chest, something clicked into place, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The morning after that window incident, I woke up with a different kind of energy, focused, sharp, almost clinical. It's funny how quickly survival instincts kick in when your home stops feeling like a sanctuary. I made my coffee slowly, letting the warmth ground me while my mind pieced together everything I'd seen, heard, and felt. This wasn't about jealousy or insecurity anymore. This was about territory, about safety, about a woman deliberately pushing until something snapped. And I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. I decided the best way to deal with someone like Marissa was simple: information. People like her rely on surprise, on chaos, on everyone else being caught off guard. So I did the opposite. I started preparing. The first thing I did was pull out my phone and set it to record before stepping outside, just in case she tried another stunt. I asked casual questions to a few neighbors while walking the dog, gently steering the conversation to the new woman next door. And every small detail they gave me, her attitude, her odd hours, the way she seemed to be watching everything, only confirmed my instincts. Later, I sat at my desk and pulled up her social media profiles, scrolling with a quiet determination I didn't know I had in me. I wasn't being nosy, I was being thorough. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized there was a pattern to her behavior. Posts filled with drama, comments dripping with envy and rage, photos with captions implying fights, feuds, and women trying to ruin her life. It all felt uncomfortably familiar, like she'd been rehearsing this routine long before she set foot on my street. And something told me I was about to uncover more than I bargained for. It was late afternoon when everything finally clicked. I was sitting at the dining table with my laptop open, cross-checking names, court databases, and the scattered breadcrumbs I'd collected from her online life. Honestly, I wasn't expecting to find anything major, maybe a heated breakup or a couple of messy posts. But when a public record popped up with her full name, my breath caught. Probation, a restraining order, harassment, not rumors, not gossip, legal documents, official, verified. I stared at the screen, the magnitude of it settling over me like a cold shadow. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow exhale as the weight of the truth washed over me. Pieces started falling into place with painful clarity. The staring, the provocative behavior, the need to dominate, the calculated comments designed to get under my skin. She wasn't just bold or unhinged, she had a history, a pattern. And suddenly, my fear dissolved into something steadier, almost empowering. I wasn't dealing with a mystery anymore. I was dealing with a repeat offender. And that realization didn't scare me. It prepared me. I whispered to myself, "Oh, sweetheart, you picked the wrong house," feeling a strange blend of disbelief and satisfaction, because now I wasn't guessing. I knew exactly what she was capable of, and more importantly, I knew exactly how to protect myself from someone like her. I began gathering every piece of evidence I had, photos of her exposing herself, timestamps, recordings of her comments, screenshots of her legal history. My hands moved calmly, almost methodically, as if I'd been training for this without realizing it. When people say knowledge is power, they never tell you how good it feels to finally hold it. That night, curiosity nudged me outside as I walked past her house under the dim glow of the streetlights. I wasn't snooping. I was simply listening, letting the quiet carry whatever it wanted to reveal. And then I heard her. Her voice drifted through an open window, loud and careless, like she didn't believe consequences applied to her. "I'm not scared," she said to whoever was on the other end of the line. "I'll make that wife of his break down eventually." The words sliced through the silence, cruel and deliberate, leaving no room for misinterpretation. I froze for a moment, feeling that familiar sting in my chest, anger, disbelief, a hint of amusement all tangled together. Then slowly, I lifted my phone and hit record, letting her own words condemn her. She kept talking, pacing, complaining, plotting. Every sentence she spoke painted a clearer picture of her intentions, and instead of rattling me, it steadied something deep inside me. There's a quiet power in hearing someone reveal exactly who they are without realizing you're listening, and she was handing me everything I needed on a silver platter. When I stopped the recording, a smile curled on my lips, small, calm, almost gracious. "Thank you, darling," I whispered softly to myself. "That's exactly what I needed." I walked home with a strange sense of clarity humming under my skin, like the first deep breath after weeks of holding them shallow. This wasn't chaos anymore. This was strategy. And while she believed she was the one tightening the screws, she had no idea I was already building the perfect response. A response she'd never see coming. I woke up the next morning feeling strangely steady, as if the fear and frustration had burned off overnight and left only focus behind. It was time to stop reacting and start acting. So I did what any woman who's been pushed too far and knows how to play smart would do. I made brunch. Not just any brunch. The kind with fresh pastries, a perfect quiche, and my best table settings. Then I invited the people who mattered most in our neighborhood. The HOA president, Mrs. Anderson from across the street, and Linda, who practically ran the community Facebook page like it was CNN. If you wanted information to move fast around here, these were the gatekeepers. As they settled into my living room, I could feel a collective curiosity building. Neighbors love a good mystery, especially when scones are involved. I kept my tone warm, casual, almost apologetic. "Thank you for coming," I told them. "I really wouldn't bother you if it weren't something serious." Their expressions shifted instantly, concern mixed with that familiar suburban hunger for the truth. I waited for the right moment, letting the tension thicken just enough before I finally reached for my phone. My hands didn't shake. They knew exactly what they needed to do. When I pressed play on the first video, the one where Marissa deliberately exposed herself while staring straight into my kitchen window, the room went utterly silent. Not shocked, gossip silent. Heavy, horrified silent. Mrs. Anderson's hand flew to her chest. The HOA president leaned forward, squinting like he couldn't believe his own eyes. And Linda? Well, she was already mentally typing her next post. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth was speaking loudly enough, and I had plenty more to show them before the morning was over. After the first video ended, I took a slow breath and opened the next file. The recording of her comments, the insults wrapped in sugar, the threats coated in smugness. Her voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable, dripping with contempt as she talked about making me break down. Every sentence felt like another stone added to a pile of undeniable evidence. The HOA president's jaw clenched. Mrs. Anderson muttered, "Good Lord," under her breath. And Linda. Oh, Linda had gone perfectly still, her eyes sharp with the kind of righteous fury only a retired school principal can summon. Then came the final piece. The audio I'd recorded outside her window, the one where Marissa admitted everything without knowing I was there. As soon as her "I'm not scared" line played, the entire room reacted at once. Mrs. Anderson gasped. The HOA president sat back, stunned. Linda whispered, "She's dangerous." And I simply nodded, because I'd lived the tension they were only now hearing for the first time. I could feel the air shifting, the collective mood turning from concern to outrage, and beneath it all, a current of support I hadn't realized I'd needed until I felt it. When I showed them the court documents, the probation, the restraining order, the past harassment cases, it wasn't dramatic. It was matter of fact, quiet, almost gentle. I wanted them to grasp the reality, not the spectacle. And they did. The HOA president cleared his throat, the kind of sound men make when they know a big decision is coming. "This violates several community codes," he said firmly. Mrs. Anderson nodded so hard her earrings swung, and Linda reached out, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. In that moment, I knew the tide had shifted, and this time, it wasn't just me standing against Marissa. The very next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing before sunrise. I didn't need to check the Facebook group to know word had already traveled farther than my brunch table. By the time the HOA president drafted the official notice, everyone who mattered had seen enough to understand the severity of what was happening. I watched from my living room window as he walked up to Marissa's door, crisp envelope in hand. the kind that usually meant someone had run a stop sign or forgotten their trash cans. But this letter carried a different kind of weight, and even from across the lawn, I could feel it. When Marissa opened it, I saw her face shift from curiosity to fury in a split second. She read the list: $2,500 fine, behavioral violation, mandatory hearing, formal warning of eviction, and her scream tore through the quiet morning like a siren. Part of me expected to feel triumphant, maybe even smug, but what I felt was something calmer, something cleaner. Validation. This wasn't petty revenge. This was accountability. She had pushed and pushed, crossing lines most people don't even think about approaching, and now the consequences had finally arrived at her doorstep. As she slammed her door and the echo faded, I allowed myself a quiet breath, the kind that releases days of tension in a single exhale. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply stepped back from the window, feeling a steady warmth in my chest. "And that's only part one," I murmured, not out of malice, but certainty. Because the hearing was coming, the evidence was solid, and for the first time since she moved in, I felt firmly, unmistakably in control. What she didn't know was that I was just getting started. The day of the HOA hearing arrived faster than I expected, though part of me had been counting down to it like a quiet drumbeat in the back of my mind. I walked into the community hall with a folder tucked under my arm, every printout, every timestamp, every screenshot neatly organized. It wasn't about theatrics, it was about truth. The room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, and for a moment that mix grounded me, reminding me why I was here, to reclaim the peace she'd tried so hard to destroy. I took my seat, kept my back straight, and waited. When Marissa walked in, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. She looked furious, almost feral, like a cornered animal ready to lash out at anything within reach. She glared at me the moment she spotted me, a look so dark it would have once shaken me. But not anymore, not after everything I'd heard, seen, and documented. The HOA board sat in a row at the front, their expressions already firm, already tired. They weren't here for drama, they were here for order. And Marissa's presence alone felt like disorder personified. The meeting began with formalities, but I barely heard them. My focus was razor sharp, locked on the moment they asked me to present my case. When I stood, every neighbor's eyes followed me, and I felt this quiet ripple of support settle around me like a protective shield. I spoke clearly, calmly, walking them through each piece of evidence without exaggeration or emotion. I didn't need theatrics. The facts were loud on their own. And as I laid everything out, I could sense the board shifting, even before they exchanged glances. This wasn't going to go her way. As soon as I finished presenting my evidence, the board turned to Marissa. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stared at me, her jaw tight, her eyes burning with a kind of rage that would have rattled me weeks ago. Then she exploded. "This is harassment!" she shouted, pointing at me like I was the one who'd orchestrated the chaos in her life. "She's obsessed with me." The room shifted uncomfortably, not because they believed her, but because the desperation in her voice was impossible to ignore. She wasn't arguing to defend herself. She was scrambling to stay afloat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't roll my eyes. I simply looked at the board and said, "Projected much?" In the calmest tone I'd used all month. A few neighbors looked down to hide their smirks, but the board didn't react. They were already done with theatrics. They asked Marissa for proof, explanations, anything that could justify her behavior. She had nothing. Just accusations, deflections, and wild stories that contradicted each other with every sentence. Watching her unravel didn't give me joy. It gave me clarity. She wasn't just reckless. She was dangerous. When the board finally held their vote, the decision was unanimous. Marissa was required to move out within 30 days. No appeals, no extensions, no loopholes. The president announced it with a firm, tired voice, as if he was relieved to finally put a lid on the chaos she'd brought to our quiet street. Marissa stared at me, her expression sharp enough to cut glass. "You did this," she hissed, like the words themselves might wound me. But all I felt was a steady, grounded calm, the kind that only comes when truth finally settles into place. When the meeting adjourned, Marissa didn't storm out. She lunged, heels clicking like gunshots across the tile floor. I watched her approach, the tension in her shoulders coiled tight, every breath shallow and furious. She stopped just inches from me, her voice dropping into a low, bitter growl. You did this. I met her stare without flinching. No, babe, I said, leaning in just enough for only her to hear. You did. I just organized it. For a moment, she froze, like no one had ever held a mirror up to her behavior before. And then she spun around and fled the room. Ethan came to my side, slipping a hand gently against my back, his expression a mix of disbelief and pride. I had no idea she was like this, he said softly, almost apologetically. I nodded, not to accuse him, but because I understood. Some storms look harmless from far away. It's only when you stand in the rain that you realize how dangerous they are. I did, I told him. That's why she's gone. It wasn't a boast. It was the truth. A simple, grounding truth about protecting our home when someone tries to tear its peace apart. As we walked out of the community hall, neighbors offered small smiles, nods, even quiet thank yous. Not because they liked drama, but because they recognized what it takes for one person to stand up when everyone else is too uncomfortable to act. And while the hearing was over, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Not yet. There would be the aftermath, the cleanup, the slow return to normal. But for the first time in weeks, the air around me felt lighter, like the storm had passed, leaving room for sunlight to find its way back in. A month later, the house next door stood quiet, finally empty, like it had exhaled after holding its breath too long. I walked out to water my garden, the lavender brushing softly against my legs, releasing that comforting scent I'd almost forgotten I loved. For the first time in weeks, I didn't glance toward her windows expecting a glare or a shadow. There was only sunlight, drifting gently across the porch where she once strutted like she owned the street. The calm didn't feel foreign. It felt like something I'd earned, something I'd fought for. Not long after, a new car pulled into the driveway next door. An elderly couple stepped out, sweet, smiling, carrying a tin of cookies like something out of a storybook. They introduced themselves with warm voices and gentle eyes, the kind that make you feel at home without trying. When they handed me the cookies, as new neighbors should, I felt a small wave of relief wash through me. This was what our street was supposed to feel like. Kindness, normalcy, peace. I didn't realize how much I'd missed it until it was right in front of me again. Later that afternoon, Ethan wrapped his arms around me in the kitchen, holding me the way he does when words aren't enough. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. You protected our home. I rested my hands over his, feeling the steadiness in him that had returned now that the chaos was gone. Never underestimate a quiet woman, I said with a smirk. Especially not one with good Wi-Fi, a printer, and a sense of justice. He laughed, the sound warm and familiar, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight lift completely from my chest.